Welcome to Leaders in Studio Lisboa. My name is Holly Campanez, and I'm the Director of Design and Creative Services at Avenue Code. My guest today is Francisco Contel-Martins. Francisco is Product Design Manager at Farfetch, where he leads multiple design teams. He's built multiple experienced design organizations from the ground up, mentored hundreds of aspiring product designers, and contributed curriculum at IAD, a prestigious design university in Portugal, where you can regularly find him delivering product design masterclasses. Welcome, Francisco, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Holly.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I'd like to get into a little bit about your background and career. Could you tell us what brought you to a career path in product design?
Sure. It was not completely linear, per se, for sure. So I started out in the university. I followed the visual design path. We had 3 paths with industrial design and interior design as well. I think if I'm looking backwards, I would say that my affinity would be with industrial design, but I got lucky to have a very good visual design professor that kind of pulled me in. Also, many of my peers and my colleagues went on into visual design, and me being like a follower of sorts, I kind of followed them there as well. But the truth is that I never felt like I really belonged to that crowd. Most of them were very good illustrators and had like a keen eye for like visual detail. Me, it was much more like about systems and inner workings of things and so on. So when I think about it, I should probably have followed industrial design. But unbeknownst to me, like visual design skills would then be very important to the kind of work that I do now. So my career path started in a small agency where I essentially took, I would say, like advertising shots for like very big brands, and I would adapt them to small supports. My first agency, we had lots of supports within like bathrooms and gyms and that sort of thing. It was like very specific audiences that we targeted, and that is where I started. However, in terms of like my learning curve, I was doing that job because I wanted to have a job, essentially. And I got to work with like very big brands and very big agencies as like an outsourcer for them to do those adaptations per se. But in the meantime, I was learning how to code in ActionScript, and I was very passionate about Flash at the time. I had read an article in Computer Arts that said something like, Flash developers make lots of money in the UK, and they're very famous. They're like rock stars. So I was like, I want to make money. I want to be a rock star. So this is probably the path for me. So I really learned the inner workings of Flash, the tool, and ActionScript, the code. And it really allowed me to start building my first experiences, my first interactive experiences, my first websites, that sort of thing. And obviously, I kind of outgrew the company that I was in at the time. I had my big break at Off Festival here in Portugal. We had like 2 editions in OLX at some point. And I've had the opportunity to work with a creative agency here in Portugal called Torque. And what we did was we did like this digital installation thing that was projected in the ceiling of the venue. And that gave me the opportunity to have like my work presented in front of other people. It really caught lots of people's attention, including at the time a creative director of the Full Six Group. And he basically invited me to go there and work with them. So to me, it was like jumping from this very small, like 10 people agency into like the biggest marketing agency here in Portugal, like very full service, very digital oriented and so on. That came with the first shock, because when I joined, at the time I joined one of the agencies that was called, at the time, Six & Co. Then became Grand Union, then was absorbed into Full Six, then was bought by OLX Group, so a lot of changes there. But the point being that when I joined the engineering team. I didn't know that. Like the opening was for a multimedia developer or something of that sort. So I joined the engineering team, and it was quite a shock because there were 3 major teams, one of which was marketing, the other one was design, and the other one was engineering. And I thought I belonged to design, but in fact I belonged to engineering because I wrote code. So again, not feeling like I really belonged there, but at the same time picking up the challenge of really understanding whether that was a career path for me or not. I learned a lot. Working as a developer was one of the probably the most enriching things in my career, in the sense that now when I manage engineering stakeholders, I do have a voice in the room and understand what they're saying and so on. So I learned, as I said, a lot about engineering. And then what happened was that I was in the middle of this road, right? I was somewhere in between design and engineering. At the time, user experience design wasn't like a thing that was thrown around that much. We did talk a little bit about accessibility on the website and some usability issues. I actually learned human-computer interaction through my engineering peers, not my design peers. So, which is very funny now that I think about it. Like my first contact with Nielsen's heuristics were through an engineer. But yes, they had like all of these systems of how to analyze how experiences should work, and me being a very systematic person, I thought that was very interesting. But in fact, my role was very much a coder per se. So I really wanted to grow outside of that, and I've had a couple of opportunities to do so. My first big break came actually at a pretty bad timing within the company. So around like 2011 or something like that, the big world crisis kind of hit us, or hit, I would say, our business, because most big companies like Coca-Cola, they were taking their marketing budgets and they were like either vaporizing them or shrinking them very much. So our business of doing like very rich micro websites, which was my expertise at the time, using Flash, kind of went away. And then the clients that stayed with us were essentially big insurance, energy companies, that sort of thing, right? So they had the money.
Recession-proof ones.
Yes. And their challenges were very different, right? Because it feels like yesterday, but the fact is that around that time, which is not that long ago, maybe a little bit over 10 years ago, most companies didn't see their websites as ways of conducting businesses. What they did was they saw their digital presences as ways of communicating their business, but not running them, right? So around that time, that's when we saw, for example, in the energy market, I work with like the biggest energy brand in Portugal called EDP. There was a new free market, a way of doing things in the energy market, and they wanted to have this form so that people would essentially buy their services for the first time. So suddenly, the website that we were working on was a tool to getting new customers, right? And the way that it worked was paramount to their bottom line. So instead of saying we want this website to look in a certain way or to communicate a certain thing, they said we want it to work, which is a very different thing, right? As you might imagine. So that was around the time when I said, actually, I have these whole skills that don't fit anywhere, and that really, I had a passion for interaction design. I had a passion about usability, that sort of thing. So maybe there's a chance for me to actually leverage the context of the agency at the time and really drive forward something new. So I asked at the time the company had like 3 partners. I've worked there for like 4 years or so. I asked them to have like this private meeting, and I said, look, I've been working here for 4 years. Probably some of you know me from the corridors or something like that. We haven't really spoke formally like we are doing now, but I have some thoughts. I have some thoughts on where the company should go. I have some thoughts of this new department that I thought would make sense on the business as it is, and I wanted to present them with a case. So one of my biggest lessons at the time was like, I was very nervous that they would say like, who are you? Aren't you like one of the engineers at the bottom line? What am I talking to you? But instead they were like, yes, like your proactivity really impressed us, so we'll give you the time to do so. So I presented like 200 slides or something like that, and it was like a big case of where the company was, where it had been, how the context has changed, and so on, and also how we could tackle the challenges in front of us, and the right person to do it would be me. So I also sold myself in that way. And that was the first time that I actually created a UX department within a company, within an agency, or at least at the time, it would see itself as an agency for sure. That was the first time that I really had my opinion elevated to a different status. At the time, I reported directly to the CEO. I started going to meetings and being like one of the key people that would kickstart projects, because I really wanted to be there from the beginning. I thought that it was a way to be impactful and so on. And yes, that was like my first experience. Then I guess the gist of it is I had reinvented myself, right? I had reinvented the way that the company worked, but it was not within my reach to reinvent the market. We were still an agency, and our business model was essentially working with marketing departments for big brands, and they would budget some projects, and that's how we worked, right? So that isn't very conducive to like innovation or big budgets or so on. It wasn't product development per se. It was out of the marketing budget. So I thought, until all of these people like reassess their priorities and understand like the value that our type of work brings into their work, I should likely try to find like a product company. And that's how I found What If I, my first job at a proper a product company. I went there. Again, they were still trying to scale their design team. They had maybe like 4 designers or so. Most of them, again, came from a background that was familiar to me, like agency designers, like visual designers. They weren't like really product designers. So I came in, and my job was to essentially make it very clear that product design wasn't the same as the creative design that was supporting essentially in marketing and communication. So to make that split, and then after defining what product design was within the company, then scale a team from there. I got there and I stayed there for maybe 2 years or so, and within those 2 years I started like as the main designer, as an individual contributor per se, and after like a year or so I had 10 people under my teams, and it was very fast scaling. It was also, I would say, my first real job as a design manager, because in the agency, we can say that most of the HR stuff goes through HR. Teams are very flat, and you have these people like creative directors and so on that have a big saying on how projects work, but they don't invest that much in terms of people's careers and so on. So this was the first time that I had like a big team under my command for all intents and purposes, and I had to figure out what motivated them, right, as well as how can I make design valuable within this company as well. That was a great experience. I've learned a lot. I spent there 2 years, as I said, and at the end of the day, I was like, I've learned a lot. I've scaled another team. I've kickstarted another design organization, but I want something that's maybe a little bit slower than it is. What If I is an American company, so the culture is very different from our own. It was a global challenge before the pandemic, so we worked. I didn't work remotely. We had an office here in Portugal, but many of the team members were in the US, so that meant that like office hours and so on were not that great. So I wanted to change, and then I found Farfetch, and that's how I got into Farfetch. I wanted to find a company whose culture was a key element that would provide me everything that I had before, but also some opportunity to grow. One of the challenges that I had in the places that I've worked before was that at some point I was always like the most senior designer doing the thing that I did, right? That's great for ego, and that's great to like for your growth, but at the same time you're capped at whatever knowledge you have at a certain time. Now, I did my investments in terms of going into conferences, and then I started teaching as well. We can talk about my career as a teacher maybe later, but the point being that I really needed some influence from like design peers who were much more senior than I did. So when I joined Farfetch, one of the big reasons why I did was because they really had a senior designer leadership there, people who at the time I had maybe 10 years experience, and I had my leadership maybe had 20. So they were doing things way before I did, and it was refreshing because here in Portugal, I guess the maturity of the craft hasn't really reached that point yet. And so having to deal with those people and learning from them was definitely a very important thing to learn, especially from the management perspective, how to deal with people. I've learned through Farfetch how bad of a manager I was before, because I've learned a lot from my mistakes. I guess that's part of the process, so I wouldn't take it any other way. But definitely, I've learned a lot of skills that I wouldn't have the chance to learn in a smaller company or a company that didn't have like direct design leadership and so on.
Yeah.
And I guess that's where I am now.
That, you know, it's so great when you get a chance actually to be a small fish in a big pond, because that's where growth happens, right?
Yeah.
But let me ask you, you know, you talk a lot about kind of coming into a new situation, finding yourself in something that was very new, whether it be the discipline of design that you were switching or working in a cross-functional team. So I want to ask you about the unique challenges you face at Farfetch. You know, something that comes to my mind is white labeling in a fashion industry, and high fashion nonetheless. How do you handle something, for example, like repurposing a design system to serve multiple brands that all have their own preferences and demands?
Yeah, well, that's definitely a very focused question, and one that I have probably a couple of insights in. Yes, in Farfetch, just to provide a little bit of context, the area that I work in, it's called FPS, or Farfetch Platform Solutions. And what we do is essentially we leverage the tech that Farfetch has, and we apply them to other brands and businesses. So many of the high fashion websites that you might see out there are actually powered by Farfetch, but no one knows. Now, the interesting part is that people only see the tip of the iceberg, so they see the website experience. But in fact, what Farfetch does is they power everything beneath it. So I'm talking about logistics, production, like photo shoots, that sort of thing. Everything is powered by Farfetch, like customer support. If you need someone to speak Mandarin or something like that, we provide that as well. So actually, we empower businesses in very different ways, and we allow even like very big brands to go into new markets, like Middle Eastern markets or Chinese markets or that sort of thing. So having said that, to provide that context, one of the challenges that we have is, depending on the brand, there might be different ways of us actually applying our technology into their own brand. In some instances, you might have, for example, a brand has a website that is a US website, and they want to adapt that into Mandarin, right? So it's very much about keeping I guess the status quo of that website, but changing it to fit a different market. Some brands launch their first website with us, like smaller brands, smaller studios and designers. They launch the first website with us. Some of them take the opportunity to like rebuild a website from scratch. Harrods comes to mind. We've launched Harrods, which is a big department store, and their website with us isn't the same website that they had before, right? So one of the challenges there is that when I joined Farfetch and I looked at this area of white labeling, my immediate thought was like, I will apply what I've learned before, right? I know about design systems, I know about white labeling, I know about all of these things. So we'll create this massively, I would say, flexible system that anyone can come in and like pick out their colors and their logos and whatever, and we can spit out the website very, very fast. It doesn't work like that, right? In fashion, and it doesn't work like that for these sorts of businesses. The reason why is that they are very creative driven. So they don't see the services that we provide as a product that they fit their needs into. They see our services as services. So we are there to help them build whatever experience they want from scratch, if need be, and taking any input that they have, especially from, for example, the creative agencies that they work with, and take that to heart. What that means in reality is that you having a strong framework and a flexible one isn't really possible, because every experience is different. And even if you try to shoehorn stuff around, what ends up happening is that your learnings about how a certain aspect of the website is interacted with doesn't apply from website to website, because they change everything. They change contrast, typography, alignment, all of the visual elements that create hierarchy, anything that you might think there's a rule for this, the next website coming in doesn't
it's completely bespoke.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in that sense, the reality of the business is that you have to create a platform that allows you to take whatever client-facing layer, whatever front end you throw at it, and make it work. So the real white labeling power is actually on the APIs, right? It's actually on the code behind things. It's actually about how transactions are made, how we can facilitate lots of different payment methods. That's the things that we kind of reuse from website to website. The visual layer, more and more we just accept that we are going to build it from scratch. Because like when we started, there was so much effort put into adapting what we had into what needed to happen that we're like, why are we starting with something that we are then desecrating all the way? So in that sense, it's a very different business. I think if the business grew, for example, to have a business where every boutique would have their own website, then for sure you would need like a reusable product and something that was a little bit more self-service. But that's not how we grew. We grew into bigger and bigger brands. We grew into department stores, into multi-brands and so on. So very, very big experiences that in fact had a team behind them. Like there's a heritage design team on the other side that has their own opinions on how their experience should be. So yeah, I guess my long form answer to that is that it isn't applying a design system. It isn't just white labeling a thing. For this sort of scale, you really need to assume that the front-facing layer is going to be bespoke depending on which client you get.
Everything you're saying is resonating because we discovered something really similar with our virtual experience practice, and we had kind of pre-built this beautiful design system, and we thought we can tailor it and tinker with it, and then enter the design team of Tory Burch or Starbucks, and it turns out they have some opinions about things.
It's true. It's true. It's so difficult to do it internally, right? Convincing your peers that a design system, well, everyone understands a design system is a great solution, but when you start implementing stuff and people have, again, those diverse opinions, that becomes a lot harder. And you're talking about the same company. I imagine different companies, not just from an authority perspective, but even from like a communication perspective. How robust do your tools and your documentation need to be in order to be interpreted by someone who isn't in the same room as you are? So definitely there's a lot of challenge there. When I worked at Waterfire, we made a big effort into design systems, and it made sense because in that context, the challenge was we had a suite of products across devices. We had like screens inside gyms, we had mobile apps, we had websites, we had back office stuff, and we had front office stuff. So that's a system that works within the same sorts of transactions and entities. So to have a way of representing one such thing across multiple devices and technologies made sense. But in Farfetch, it doesn't do much sense.
I hear you. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about your teaching career, and you do a lot of mentoring as well. So what is the one piece of advice that you find yourself giving often to young product designers?
Yeah, well, I get exposed to many people who are, I would say, starting their career, not necessarily coming out of the university per se. For example, in any postgraduates, like the group of people that you get there is very diverse. Some people, like, they did their master's degree and then they were like, I don't know, I want to learn like specific things about interaction design. Most people, I would say, come from like either like a visual design background. They've worked maybe 5 or 10 years in a different career, and now they're doing this. Some people are like, I didn't do design before, but I had some like web adjacent job, and I found out that product design was a very much requested skill set, and therefore I'm doing this. So I tend to give advice to these sort of people, which in some ways it's a lot of responsibility because it's the starting, it's like the kickstart of their career, right? But in many ways it's also easy because it's the basics, right? You're not saying, oh, you've been doing this for 15 years like I have, and here's your next challenge. But there isn't many people who have done this. Instead, what I do is I take these people who have very little understanding of how the industry itself works and what they need to do in order to be successful, and I provide them with advice. The most often, like the question that I get a lot is usually like where to start, right? or do I need a portfolio? It comes in multiple flavors, but it's generally the same question, like what's the thing that I need to do so that I'm confident enough to approach a company and say, I want to work for you. And yes, what I usually say, and sometimes this is, I would say, rather controversial, but I say, forget about your portfolio. This is like a big design trope, which is you cannot get a job unless you have like this thick thing under your arm that you present in order to show your skills. Depending on what you want to do and when you want to work, this might be different. If you are working for a creative agency, probably they'll ask for a portfolio. Even many product organizations still ask for a portfolio. But if you are starting out, it's rather common that you don't have a great portfolio. So people think, oh, I need like a diverse set of things that you don't need that complexity. What you really need to do and to demonstrate is essentially that you can conduct a process end-to-end, right? That you can understand what a problem statement is and how you can address something, how you can iterate on it, and how you can test your assumptions. And you can do that with a ghost project. You can simply go and say, I will take this thing that is very familiar to everyone, let's say an Instagram flow or something like that, and I will rework it. And if you have access to the things that you need in order to conduct such a project, you will be able to demonstrate that. Now, having seen a lot of portfolios, having seen a lot of exercises, a lot of work, especially during hiring, one of the things that we come across is like these, as I said, diverse portfolios with multiple projects. We don't generally have time to go through all of them. We might not even pick the best one to show the skills. So I would say to anyone starting, like, focus on something that really demonstrates how you think, okay? And it doesn't really matter the applicability per se, as long as you show like a strong process, something that really resonates with the people that you're working on. Again, this is for an entry-level position, right? You are going to learn a lot by being with your peers and doing that for real. So what we usually are searching for is very much potential and not necessarily like a skill set or a robust skill set. One of the things that really changed my point of view was when I started out, I really assessed designers based on their skills, like how good they were at doing a certain thing. And what I've come to learn is that most of the skills that I was assessing are hard skills that you can learn while doing the job. And maybe it takes you like a couple of years to reach that level, but you can in fact learn those. The things that once you get to a certain level you cannot learn are the ones that are more difficult to assess. And if you can get some of that from someone starting out, like this untapped potential, like this inquisitive mindset, these sorts of things that come with the person and their personality and so on. If you can get some of that, you can build the rest with it. Now, again, depending on the seniority level that you're working on, if you need like a lead designer, you probably need to have those skills very, very, very much in a level of maturity that is not the one that I'm describing. But if you're just starting out, those are the things that I would definitely search for.
It's great advice. And speaking of kind of coaching and mentoring, you mentioned that when you joined Farfetch, you kind of had a wake-up call about management or leadership style. So tell me a little bit about that. But I want to, rather than saying what maybe you were doing wrong before, like tell me something that you're proud of now. Tell me about the leader you've grown into.
Well, it's always difficult to talk about oneself in this way. Quite recently, I had a job interview where someone was basically giving me a job offer. And one of the questions that came that I thought was interesting is like, how do you think your team describes you when you're not in the room? And I was like, cringe. That's a great question,
Try
right?
Not to think about it, right?
Would I be proud of what they said or not? Comparing to other experiences, my hope is that the change in mindset that I've gone through these last 4.5 years have made me into a person that enables others to grow. Okay, so the big change for me was that, and this is common to anyone within the career. You're celebrated as a designer when you're an individual contributor because you're very good at doing a thing. right? And someone says, "Oh, you're such a good designer. Have you considered taking this team and helping them become the thing that you want?" And you're like, "Of course, I'm the best around. I can help them, and I can update their methods and so on." And what you come to learn is that that's really not the approach. Because if you try to do that, what you are doing is you are trying to impart your knowledge and to impose your ways of working in the ways that they are learning. So the thing that I've learned in Farfetch is how to create autonomous teams, right? And that's very much about providing them with an environment where they can grow, a lot of accountability on their own work, but at the same time, a lot of trust in what they do. So nowadays, instead of saying, this is what we want to achieve, and this is how we're going to do it, and I'll help you do the thing that you want, what I said is like, this is the challenge, this is the goal that we're going. Do you feel comfortable with the things that you need to do in order to achieve that goal? If not, I'm here to enable you, but likely not to take your hand and show you how to do a wireframe or how to conduct research or that sort of thing, but much more about the things that you are maybe not aware of, like managing stakeholders, like the political map of things, or how the industry is going in a certain way, or how the business is giving us maybe some signs that should be a priority or this shouldn't be a priority, or maybe the ways of working within the company have a certain tension that might not be as conducive to our success. So those are the things that I tend to go for. In terms of managing people, I would say that autonomy is key. It is very scary in the beginning because you're saying you are now responsible for your own destinies. People will definitely have some successes and have some fails as well. But that's the interesting part, is that both of them work as a learning moment, right?
Yeah,
it's very teachable to take someone's failings and say, this is why we failed, this is how we got here, what's your opinion, how would you do better, and so on. And those are the moments that you are building people. So in Farfetch, I've had the luck of working with very talented individuals who, for the last 4 years and a half, have grown into their roles, created new roles, started managing people. Some of them gained the confidence to go into a business area and dealing with more senior stakeholders, that sort of thing. And I couldn't have done it if I was the same person that I was before. I was very result-oriented in my previous job, very much about how can I use my team to get to where I think the business should be. This is how my mindset was. And now my mindset is much more, how can I create the best design team that can make those decisions for me? So
it's a pretty radical shift, actually.
It is.
And you mentioned kind of helping them to cultivate skills that aren't immediately apparent, like working with stakeholders.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what are the most important skills to be a successful product designer?
Yeah. That's a good question. I'm thinking of a lot of things, and I'm not sure which one is, like, the typical answer would be like empathy, right? Understanding, putting oneself in other people's shoes and so on. We've talked a little bit about potential as well. It's not a skill, but it's definitely something that I would, that I'm always looking for in designers. One of the things that I think, let me put it in a different light.
Sure.
If you look at the challenges that design organizations are facing now, much of it is like the maturity of our practice is not at the same level as other practices, right? So if you think about the challenges that particular context brings, that means that you, by virtue of being a designer, in some contexts or some cases, your opinion will not be as respected as other areas that are much more mature. Right? Yeah. So with that in mind, with that framing, how can you as a designer combat that? Right? And the way that I think about this is that many, I don't know if it's like from like a training standpoint or how we went to school, or maybe because we have a background in arts, many of us, or whatever, but we tend to ignore business as if business was this thing that is the realm of product owners or whatever. And one of the things that you really learn from engineers, especially more senior ones, is that they talk less about code, they talk more about business rules. Like more senior engineers are like, I don't even write code, I just like do business logic, right? So there's a reason for that, right? So I think that design is more or less the same. If you want to have impact, you need to have a seat at the table. And to have a seat at the table, you need to make sure that your voice, not just your individual voice, but the voice of your practice is heard. And to accomplish that, you need to really go deep and talk business the same way that any other function does. It's not, you don't lose yourself doing that. It doesn't mean that you are not the voice and the advocate for the user. It doesn't mean that you don't have to have the necessary skills to be designed, and that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you really need to be talking about business the same way that other functions are, and you need to be someone that is very aware of those constraints, right? So when you're discussing, for example, with product, there's a very interesting relationship going on between product and product design now. Many an organization have product design under product, right? Which is something that again, probably a topic for another day, but definitely that is already like a sign of where they see the product design function as a subset of the product function. The way I see it is, if I'm talking about senior people and I'm talking about like the product triads of engineering, product management, and product design, I see them three as having a voice and a saying. I think they worry about different things, right? Generally speaking, in terms of like tech stability, feasibility, that sort of thing, that's usually up to engineering on the user side. And the human factors, you have design, and then on the product management side, even though in many ways one would see them as the conveyors of what the business wants, I personally see their job as very much not only a vision job of stating what the thing should be, but also in some ways, and depending on the organization, a very operational job, because they tend to keep track of timelines and that sort of thing, right? Now, I'm not saying how they should do their job. In fact, I've tried different ways of working with different product managers, and depending on where they stand, I kind of tend to adapt to their own ways of working. But to go back to your point of what design should do and what the skill is, if you are able to discuss business at the same level as other functions, but then you bring your unique voice of design, and they do the same for their own functions, you're probably leveraging what's best, which is a common knowledge of what the thing is, again, the business, but a very different skill set towards how to approach it. So in my mind, the perfect solution is one where engineering will probably suggest something that no one else is aware, because they are the ones that control the technology, and therefore they understand what is possible and what is feasible and what is rapid and so on. And that, for example, on the design side, that means that we are also advocates for some things that other people might not be aware of, but in terms of general understanding of where we want to be, it has to be across the three disciplines. So to go back to the skill, I think that if you worry too much about the issues that are proprietary to design, you are capping yourself, okay? So it's very important in the beginning. That's why our junior designers start with very small scopes, because business-wise, there's really nothing challenging there. Like there's a very concrete problem that is predefined for them. And it's very natural that you, as an individual contributor, you want to grow to a point where you feel comfortable about your craft. So it's normal for the first 2 or 3 job titles that you have that you're very much about design. You only read design books, you understand the methods, you understand all of those things. As soon as you get into a point where you're managing other people and dealing with stakeholders from other functions, you need to broaden your way of seeing things. Now, the interesting thing is that sometimes people see this as like a dilution of what design is. It's very common, for example, in Farfetch, at some point in my career, if I wanted to progress, I would have to go into product, because the person that I reported into was a director of product. Therefore, I didn't have any more senior designers at some point in that part of the organization. So some people say that you are kind of losing yourself as a designer if you go through that route. I would say that the problem there is that I reported into a director of product, and he didn't have a director of design, and he didn't have a VP of design, and we didn't have a design voice all the way up until the CEO, and that is the real issue here, right? If you had that career path, if you had that voice across all of the hierarchy within the company, then I would say you're in a much better position to achieve what you want as a designer. You're also creating like an aspirational thing for every designer there. And one of the things that I've learned in Farfetch is that when you don't have anyone to set an example for you, again, you tend to look for examples elsewhere, right? But if you have someone within your own training, within your own area, that's being successful at what they do, and they're coming from the same place as you can actually say, if I want to be there, I know what type of person I need to be.
On the other hand, you have a great track record of going to executives and saying, here's what I see, let's create something new. So who knows, maybe that's what you're going to do next.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about it, like what's the next step. It's in my mind, I don't want to sound like a skeptic at this stage, because I want this to be as positive as possible. But I think that in many ways it's based on what the company can provide, right?
Sure, but I think you made such a good point about the maturity of design as a practice, right? And we see this globally. We're a global consulting company, so it doesn't matter where the company is. It doesn't matter the culture. The design is still fighting to mature itself as a practice, and these roadblocks are going to be everywhere until people like you are making the change and kind of showing what's possible in a new way.
Yeah, I wish I felt that I felt exactly as you were describing. For sure, I mean the maturity of organizations, I think that the unfortunate factor that I see is that maturity is in many ways tied to the size of the teams. So the bigger the teams, the bigger the company, the more mature you get on the design side. Now, I'm not saying this as a blanket statement. I'm sure there's a lot of pretty poor examples and good examples of small teams accomplishing things. But I definitely feel like I guess from the perspective outside of design looking in, when someone says, we need someone from the design practice that is more senior than the most senior person that we have, who is that person and how did that person reach that conclusion, right? And in my experience, generally speaking, is someone who has worked with a more senior design person. It's not someone who from the ether summoned this thing that, no, we should elevate the practice, this other practice that doesn't belong to my own area. And that's why we see that in companies that are maybe bigger or have larger design teams with a little bit more ease than we see in smaller companies. I do a lot of interviewing on both sides. I really like to go to interviews with other companies and see what they have to offer, because it's really, to me, it's like market analysis.
It's a great way to learn.
For sure. And one of the things that I've come to learn being on the side of the person applying to a job is that you see a job opening, it has a certain job title or salary band or whatever indicator you might imagine of seniority from the description of the role. And you're like, this sounds interesting. Then you look at the description, generally cookie cutter, imported from somewhere else, so it doesn't really tell you for that specific purpose where you are. And then immediately you go in interview mode, and like 2 or 3 questions in, you understand that it's nothing what you had thought. A couple of key questions that I always do is like, okay, this position, who is this position reporting into? And as soon as I hear something like, oh, it's reporting into the CTO or into some product function or something like that, I immediately challenge that. I've had an interview not that long ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago, again, for a very fancy job title. And they said, oh, you're reporting into, I think it was the marketing officer of sorts. And I was like, really? Why? And then they described the company as having product design as a factor of marketing efficiency, per se, And you would
you
look at that organization and you're like, the battles that I would have to fight to get away from this point of view.
For sure.
And lucky enough that they reached out to me maybe a couple of days after we had our first interview, and they said something like, oh, we're really looking for someone who's like much more performance focused.
But we do this to ourselves because it's, as you said, we have this tendency to make the business the enemy, or to feel like we're selling out in some way if we start to really look at data. And the reality, I see this with our client portfolio every day. It's like, if we can throw those assumptions out the window and say, actually, how can design be a contribution at the highest level of this like upstream product decisions before it ever even gets to maybe a proper product division at all, and bring design thinking to those executive and strategy sessions, that is where we're going to show value. But I think it's kind of a self-limiting attitude.
For sure. And we're being in some ways. So my wife works in a business school, right? And she provides training for a lot of things, including design thinking, right? So she has a lot of workshops with a bunch of executives doing design thinking, and it's not rocket science, right? It's they understand the value of having a certain lens on their business. To me, it's very funny that you have these outsiders from the practice practicing our own practice better than we are, because they're at a different level. So in some ways, they are kind of stealing our lunch in that sense. And I'm not saying this as a negative. I'm saying that we should really be aware of the reasons that drove us to be in this position. And the reasons is we should be the ones advocating for the things they see value in, instead of trying to focus on other stuff. Again, design tends to be very inbred. One of the things that you've probably noticed, like if you're going to a design conference, right, and you have talks about, let's say, leadership, strategy, that sort of thing, as interesting and as insightful as they are, only a small part of the audience is actually paying attention to those and really leveraging what they have to say. In part is because not everyone's context is the same. Sometimes you cannot really apply that type of knowledge to your own organization. But in many ways, it's like, this isn't why I'm a designer, right? And then you have someone coming in with great illustration work, portfolio on typography, something like that, and that really engages the audience, because now this is a pure thing. Like this is very what I've learned in that design was, and that to me is a sentiment that again speaks to what most people within the practice value. Now, I think there's space and there's room for everyone. You can really operate at whatever level you want. You don't have to be a design leader of sorts to have a successful design career. In fact, I'm trying to make the best out of the people who don't have that ambition. How can I provide them a career as individual contributors where what they really like to do is interaction design, right? So I want to provide them with that. But at the same time, I know that the only way for me to allow those opportunities is to actually be in a position where I can have some weight on my decisions and I can shift resources around and that sort of thing. And to do that, you really need to like get your hands dirty and talk to whatever level that you're in. So I think that's needed.
Juicy questions.
Yeah.
I think we could go much deeper on this. Maybe we do a follow-up session one day. Sure. But I just want to say thank you for joining us. Great insights, and it's been such a pleasure to have you on as a guest. Thank you.
Thank you, Ollie. It's been a pleasure being here as well.
Likewise.